Very honored to be here this evening. I was especially happy to hear that I only have 10 minutes to speak. That's always a big question when you give a talk. Not long ago I was giving a talk in Bogota, Colombia, and what I didn't know was that the Colombians have a very long and expansive cultural tradition of oratory, and I forgot to ask the how long question until about an hour before my talk, and finally I said to the organizer, how long do I have? And he said, I don't know. What do you think? 2 hours? And I had that moment that what anthropologists call a moment of cross-cultural dissonance. Anyway, 10 minutes in my family tradition is just about right. I come from a family where a good dinner table conversation is about 4 sentences. So 10 minutes to explain why I think children's rights is a wonderful cause is just about perfect. And for the Colombians in the room, I urge you just to track down Fred, because as you just heard, he really likes to go on and on. I realize this is an evening devoted to children's rights, but I'm not going to say much about children's rights because I have a rule that I never talk about something that my audience knows more about than I do. So if you were all pilots, I would talk about biology. If you were all artists, I would talk about traffic safety. If you were all in the Bush administration, I would talk to you about the Iraq War. So I thought I would talk about dogs for a moment. A couple weeks ago, I went took a trip to something called the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary, which is this quite extraordinary place. It's about 3.5 hours west of Las Vegas, right in southern Utah, right at the border with Arizona. And it's in the 3,700 acres of some of the most extraordinary country you'll see. This breathtaking canyon country in southern Utah. And it's an organization, it's an enormous organization, it has a budget of about $30 million a year, and hundreds of volunteers and caseworkers and animal psychiatrists and trainers. And what they do is they take in animals who would otherwise be euthanized. It's a place for animals that no one wants. And so they have hundreds of cats, and they have horses in pasture, and they have pot-bellied pigs, and most importantly, they have dogs. They have about 400 dogs. This is the place where the Katrina dogs went, the dogs that were rescued off the streets of New Orleans. And it's also most famously where all of the Michael Vick dogs went, or at least a large number of them, the most damaged and troubled of Michael Vick's dogs. And so I went there because I was really interested in the Vick case. And I had some of the people who worked there took me around the facility. And they'd gotten 22 of these animals in January of 2008. And when they arrived, they were almost without any kind of social skills whatsoever. These were almost feral dogs. And they put them in this special cabin, which had all these individualized dog runs. And they put them on a schedule. They walked them at 11 and woke them at 7. They hand-fed them because these dogs had no experience with people. And they needed to learn the trust of people. And for the first 4 or 5 months or so, someone slept in the cabin with the dogs every night, so that the dogs would have a person around the clock, because they were trying to reintroduce them to the world of people. And these are some of the most damaged dogs you will ever see. They were scarred, they had nerve damage, they had some of them had their teeth surgically removed, some of them had been used as bait. I mean, this is really the most kind of horrifying picture of dogs. But now, about 1.5 years later, they're at the point where they will interact with people in a kind of meaningful way. If you scratch them behind the ears, they'll grab your tail and they'll lick you in the face. Now, I'll admit, the first time I walked around with these people at Best Friends, I was a little cynical. Because these are dogs, after all, right? I mean, and they're never going to be able to leave this place, right? They're so profoundly damaged, and they can't interact ever with other dogs. They can't be let out of these pens. So they're they're kind of permanent wards of this particular sanctuary. And I wondered, why are we going to such extravagant lengths on behalf of these incredibly damaged dogs? But as I thought about it, I realized why, and that is because dog fighting is a very particular kind of moral crime, a particularly corrosive kind of moral crime. And it's because that sport is built around the betrayal of trust. Right? Why do dogs go into the ring against another dog and fight sometimes to the death over the course of many hours? They do that because they love their masters. Right? It's out of love. There's a phrase, this incredibly chilling phrase in a book I read about dog fighting that says that the root of a fighting dog's motivation is the desire to please an owner at any expense to itself. And the owners understand that and they exploit that. And in fact, in a dog fight, what the owners of the dogs do is they run around, and so that they're always within the line of sight of their animal. Because they understand that so long as the animal sees them, they will continue to fight, even unto the death. And that's the reason that we responded so harshly in the Michael Vick case to those allegations of being involved in a dog fight. And that's why we treated Michael Vick more harshly in many ways than we treat drunk drivers who kill people. Because on some level we felt that betrayal of trust was about as low as a human being can stoop. Right? It put him in the same class as fathers who sexually abuse their children or husbands who physically abuse their wives. There is something about that betrayal of trust that we think is deserving of special approbation. And the reason that we go to extravagant lengths at places like Best Friends is that we think that a crime as corrosive as that betrayal of trust, demands an extravagant response, right? We need to repair that bond, that connection of loyalty and love between an animal and a human if we're going to retain some part of our humanity. There was a moment when I was there that I'll never forget, which was one of the caregivers of woman named Anne was playing with a dog. And Meryl was one of the most beaten up of the Vick dogs, and she was talking about, she'd been working with this dog for a year and a half, and she said, I'm building a relationship with this dog. And she said this thing that I'll never forget, and she said, Meryl needed to see that when people were around, bad things would not happen. Now, what's really odd to me is that even though there is this really beautiful clarity in the way that we understand our obligations towards dogs, there is not a beautiful clarity in the way that we understand our obligations to each other. The great irony of the Michael Vick case, of course, is that everything that can be said about dogfighting can equally be said about football, right? What is football based on? It is based on the exploitation of the love and loyalty of young men for the game, right? They give their all for this game, and what do they get in response, right? How do we reward them for that loyalty? Well, we're finding out now. We're finding out that 10 and 20 years down the road, some extraordinary percentage of football players suffer permanent and profound cognitive disability. They end their lives in dementia wards, right? That is obscene in precisely the same way that dogfighting is obscene. Well, the same thing is true of children, right? There's a basic human contract between children and their parents, and that is that the kind of fundamental loyalty that children have towards their mothers and fathers will be honored and rewarded. But in some cases, for any number of reasons, that contract is severed. And what this organization does is to try and repair that fundamental bond of loyalty. I remember when I left the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary, I was incredibly depressed. And I wasn't, it was in part because what I had seen there was so beautiful, so pure, and so, in many ways, so noble, right? But what I found depressing is that even though, as a society, I was to be reminded that even though as a society we do such an extraordinary job in fulfilling our minor moral obligations towards dogs, we do such a haphazard job in fulfilling our obligations towards each other, which are of a much more serious import. So I just wanted to say that to impress upon you the importance and the power and the meaning of what this organization does. So God bless all of you who have taken up this cause, and there really is no higher calling. Thank you very much.